Okay. Welcome, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. We are working on sort of hybrid events right now. So we are test recording through Teams to see if we can actually live stream one of our programs. And it seemed like a really great program to record because we have Chuck Ayers here, and it's just such a special moment. And if you know Chuck, he's an amazing storyteller. But that being said, I'm not a very loud person. I am Allison Kaplan. I'm director of the May 4 Visitor Center. I want to welcome you here to this evening's event. This is our opening for our exhibition, Graphic Content Comics of May 4. We have at least one more event coming up inspired by this exhibition. On April 11th, we will have a Durf Factor, graphic novelist, and also a former Akron Beacon Journal her staff person to speak. That evening, artist Catherine Weirick will also be with us. So I hope that you can come out for that event. Please share on social media tonight everything you see and experience, and keep pushing this exhibition out. We're hoping that a lot of people will come through and see it and experience this documentation of May 4 in such a unique way. And stay tuned to our website for other upcoming activities and events related to May 4 as the commemoration is nearly approaching, and there will be lots of exciting announcements about programs and activities. So before we get started with our program tonight, there are a few people I need to thank that helped make this exhibition and tonight's event possible. First of all, I want to thank Gabby Lutz, who is a VCD student here. You can see her back there. She is responsible for the design of this exhibition. So she is graduating soon, and this is part of her major outro project. I think she did a fantastic job, and so please get her. I also want to thank Matt Burton, who is also part of the library staff, who helps us to design these exhibitions and push out all of the materials that get people, engaged with the activities here at the center, and we couldn't do it without him. I also want to thank Skylar Risley, who is our adjunct here at the May 4 Visitor Center and is constantly engaged in helping me to make the exhibitions not be crooked or have spelling errors. She is an amazing editor and historian, so thank you to her. Liz Campion, who is here as well as the May 4 archivist and has greatly helped. Also, Cynthia Williams over at the library. We are part of the university library system. Amy Martineau, who has stayed late tonight to help us try and record this and push it out. And of course, Dean Ken Verhanna, who is here. And I want to thank a special shout out to Lori Bose, who recently left the May 4 Visitor Center. She now works over in special collections, but she is the former assistant director and really helped to make this entire space possible. So if you don't get to high five her tonight, please stop by and do that at some point, because she is fabulous and I learned everything I know about being the director of the May 4 Visitor Center from her. Also the students and staff of the May 4 Visitor Center and all of the artists who have been featured in this exhibition. So on with the festivities. I have often said when I arrived here at Kent State, the first thing that I did was pick up the phone and call 3 people. 2 are in this room, Chris Butler, Chuck Ayers, and Durf Factor. And I knew Durf previously, but I did not know these two people, I just am an Akronite and an Akron native and realize their connection to May 4 and always greatly admired them. So I knew when I arrived here that I wanted to showcase Derf Factor's work. And as I was researching comics in May 4, I discovered a very persistent voice in the Kent Stater and realized it was one that I had grown up knowing and connecting with in my local newspaper in Akron through the editorial pages and the funny pages. So Chuck Ayers is an Akron institution. In Akron, it is hard to find a place to even meet up with him where he is not deluged with people. And he told me this when we first met. We could not meet at our local Highland Square coffee shop because too many people were going to come over and bother him. And it's true. And it's because he is the kindest person and the most incredible storyteller, which you will find out this evening. If you don't believe me, you can go over here and scan the QR code for his oral history, which I think is the longest oral history in the history of our oral history collection, which is about 2 hours, but you will listen to the entire thing. And I also want to announce these panels over here feature his work. The crankshaft pieces are part of the May 4 collection, but we are going to make permanent retractable panels that are part of our collection here at the May 4 Visitor Center of Chuck's piece of the exhibition. So we can continue to educate and commemorate his amazing experiences and illustrations of May 4 here at the center. So I'm very excited about that. And just a little about Chuck before we get started. He graduated from Kent State University with a degree in graphic design. While studying here, he drew cartoons for the Daily Kent Stater and the Akron Beacon Journal, where he later became an editorial cartoonist. Following the events of May 4, 1970, he produced a political cartoon that went from the Daily Kent Stater to the New York Times, earning him a Pulitzer Prize nomination. He also illustrated the popular comic strip Crankshaft with fellow Kent alum Tom Batouf. He's taught cartooning for Kent State and the University of Akron. And in 1986, he received a first place award for editorial cartoons from the Ohio Associated Press. So I am so overwhelmed and excited to have Chuck here with me tonight to briefly dialogue. Again, he's an amazing storyteller, so I'm just here to like steer the boat, but we will spend about 30 minutes or so chatting, and then what I will do is open the whole thing up to questions. So we'll have more of a reception and Chuck will be here to answer questions that you have and just chat with you. So first of all, Chuck, can you tell me what got you interested in comics as a kid?
Okay. I'm going to hold off on that answer for just a second because there was just two things I want to say. Happy first full day of spring. And looking through my calendar the other day, this date's sort of stuck in my head. I thought, what is March the 20th? And it occurred to me that on March the 20th of 1971, I was walking across a stage in my cap and gown. I graduated from Kent on March 20th of 71. So this happy anniversary to me. It's 53 years ago. I told a friend about that today and she said, no, I think you got that wrong. That has to only be 35 years, not 53. So. And I've forgotten the question.
I want to mention too that I have a few illustrations up here. So this is from Chuck Takes a Look, which was, this is in the introduction. So this took all of the work from the Daily Kent Stater as well as the illustrations you did for the Beacon.
Yeah.
So you can get a sense of what Chuck looked like here on campus at the time.
Look at all that hair.
So we were talking about what got you interested in cartoons and comics.
I was fortunate in that I started drawing when I was about 2 years old. and I just never stopped. It's kind of the only thing that I know how to do. It's the only thing that I want to do. And if I hadn't been able to make my living doing it, I probably would be in a cardboard box someplace down the street. I've been interested in history for a long time. It goes back to 1956. There was a movie that came out about Alexander the Great with Richard Burton as Alexander. I was like 8 years old. I was completely taken with it, and I started reading about ancient Greek history. And it just kind of led into a general overall interest in history. And I was able to morph that into everything that I did. I was a graphic design major here at Kent, and if I had stuck around for like 2 more quarters, I would have had a minor in art history. But I didn't. I'd already been in school here for 6 years, so it's time to get out. But it's all I do. And when I got to Kent, I started working for the Stater, and I was already working at the Beacon Journal part-time. I put myself through school working at the paper. And you did mention the one cartoon that came out a couple of months after the shootings. It was when the Portage County Grand Jury report came out about the shootings. And I walked into the Stater office, and people were outraged and what's going on. And they started telling me, and they handed me a copy of the report, which I read, and I was fuming by the time I was like 2 pages into it. It totally exonerated the guard. It totally blamed students. Is that the cartoon?
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I still have that copy of the Portage County Grand Jury report. I was given one that day. They got a hold of multiple copies in the Stater office. And I remember one of the editors of the paper saying, "Is there anything you want to do with this?" And I said, "Damn sure I want to do this." And this was the cartoon that came from it. It's probably the most emotional cartoon that I have ever done that was published. And I was in the brought the cartoon back, I think, the next day into the office. And there happened to be a stringer for the New York Times there. And kind of a little bit of backtracking here, but all my cartoons that I had done for the Stater before that were basically social cartoons. They were, I did stuff about life on campus. I did stuff, I did a lot about the food in the cafeterias, which was awful. Kent had the worst football teams then, so they always got into the cartoons and just life on campus and making fun of situations and making fun of professors in general, which I kind of became one then at Akron U and Kent. But they were just more social instead of political. And this was the first real political cartoon that I ever did. And the stringer was shown a copy of it because he was writing a story about that grand jury report. And he came over, he says, "Hey, I'm doing this story for the Times. Do you mind if I send a copy of this along?" And I said, "No, go ahead." Thinking that'll never be in the Times. And so the very next day, there's a story by this guy and this cartoon in the New York Times. So my very first real official political cartoon ended up reprinted in a couple dozen college newspapers and in the New York Times. And so I guess it was just sort of a natural progression from that point on to start working along those lines. When I graduated, I started working then full-time for the Beacon. And within a couple of years, I was the political cartoonist, job I held for 13 years.
And so we're kind of jumping around back and forth here, but I wanted to show how far this political cartoon went. So it was represented in the defense of the Ken 25. So
Right.
these are a promotional kind of newspaper that or type of zine that was promoting their cause. This is amazing.
This is my favorite.
And it really says how powerful cartoons and comics can be. So do you want to tell them about this, the riot that you were about to end
Yeah,
for your cartoon?
I apparently was single-handedly going to end the world. And I was a lot more conservative than most of the people I hung around with. But not entirely. That was one of the beauties of being here at Kent in those days. I had friends who were in the Young Republicans, and I had a couple of friends who were in SDS. And I can remember walking into the student union one time, and there was down a hallway, and there was space on both sides. And on one side was United States Marine recruiters, and on the other side was the Kent Committee to End the War in Vietnam. And literally right across from each other on either side of the hallway. And so that was sort of my life of, I was learning both sides of everything all the time. It's not that one-sided world that it seems to be now. You're either one thing or another, and nobody's going to cross that line to even to get into the middle. It was the beauty of being here where it could be exposed to all sorts of ideas and concepts, and I could have friends on both sides. And I told Allison one time, I always seem to understand both sides of a lot of the issues. And everybody had buttons of, support our boys in Vietnam, or, bring our boys home right now. So I found an old button, I painted it black and painted a white question mark on it. And that's what I wore for years, was just this question mark, because I think I've never stopped asking those questions, and I don't know that I've ever answered one of them yet.
So I wanted to ask you too, you were a transfer student from the University of Akron,
Right.
where you had to serve in mandatory ROTC.
Right.
So I want you to talk a little bit about that. And we were just musing about the photo over there that ran in the stater of you. You're wearing an Akron U sweatshirt.
Akron U sweatshirt.
So I think talking about, the time that you spent in the ROTC too, coming to Kent and that kind of experience and impact it had on you.
Well, a lot of people don't seem to realize that a lot of the colleges at that time had contracts with the government, with the military. And ROTC was compulsory at a number of schools. And so all male students were required to be in ROTC for 2 years. I was only at Akron U for a single year, one semester part-time and one semester full-time. The part-time exempted me from ROTC. The full-time semester meant that I had to pick one. And my dad was in the Army Air Force during World War II, and so I went into the Air Force ROTC. And I kicked myself that I never, ever got a photo of me in a uniform. Because I don't think too many of my friends would believe that these days. But it was just compulsory. We marched and we went to classes, and we had to wear uniforms 2 times a week. And it was just really regimented into if you went into the days we had to wear uniforms, if you went into a classroom, and it was 800 degrees in this room, in the spring and the early fall, you had to look around and find the highest ranking cadet and ask that cadet if we could take off our coats. And I saw a guy one time, they did random demerits. They would have inspections. There was an officer roamed around the campus with a couple of cadet MPs, And I saw them give this guy enough demerits to kick him out of ROTC. And if he got kicked out of ROTC, he would have been kicked out of the university. And if he got kicked out of the university, he would be 1A and at the top of the draft list. So it was like watching somebody get a death sentence, walking around your campus. So when I transferred to Kent, which was not the reason I came here, but I was heavily recruited by ROTC. Well, you've been in ROTC at Akron U. You should. So I don't think I would. The only thing I really learned was that you didn't have to salute an officer if you were in a building. So we found a couple of buildings where had this long sidewalk and a doorway halfway in the building. We get about 7 or 8 of us, and you know, a guy looking down the sidewalk each way, and we just hang there by the doors, and somebody would go, officer coming, and we'd all look down that way, and you could see them, and they were pretty gung-ho guys, and so they get close, and you could see that arm twitching. They're ready to return that salute, and go, okay, now, and 2 guys would open the doors, and we would just slide in the doors and then close the doors behind us as these officers walked by, and they were just so mad at us. That's the highlight of what I learned in ROTC.
So
How to avoid saluting.
So we showed some early daily Kent Stater images up here as we were kind of going through. So we talked a little bit about the cafeteria, talking about the bus. Then there's sort of this transition on campus, and this is sort of, you know, things are changing. I love this slide in the family stone because you told me that you did illustrations. You painted the backdrop for that concert.
Yeah, we did these big cut out, you know, sort of psychedelic clouds that they used to do, you know, and spray painted these huge sheets of paper, and it took forever on ladders to pin these things up.
Mm-hmm.
And they kept falling down during the concert, and they had these mountains of speakers, and so you could see like this much of the cloud above the speakers. The best concert I ever saw at Kent.
But then there's this transition, and we're kind of going back to this discussion of the Vietnam War and the way you're managing it in your artwork. So you say that one work is your first political cartoon, and it does have, it has hard edges, it feels very reactionary, but you're really approaching politics slowly.
Yeah.
And I love this. If you could tell, this is across the hall in the center. It's part of our permanent exhibition, and we use it to talk about the draft lottery. And you told this great story that I often tell students about that experience, especially your signature here and what it means. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. I was the head of a group called Chestnut League at that time. Another thing people don't believe when I tell them that I did that, I was the chairman of Chestnut League, and it was a kind of a sports spirit organization. We did posters around campus for football games and basketball games. And on December 1st of 1969, Kent State played Akron U basketball at Akron. So we got these buses together. Kent won the game. The buses arrived late. We had to drop the cheerleaders off early. So everybody after the game gets on the bus, and suddenly I go, where's the cheerleaders? And somebody said, well, they don't know where the bus is. And I had to go find them and got them, and I bring them back, and I stepped onto the bus and I said, okay, is everybody here? And they yelled, shut up, everybody on the bus. And I don't even know how it happened. I guess we're wrapped up in organizing this thing, and you hear this little radio in the back of the bus, and you hear number 85 and a date. And oh crap, it's the draft lottery tonight. And we didn't know how many of the dates we'd missed. We had just won a big basketball game, and it was dead silence in the bus all the way back to Kent, listening to these dates and numbers being called. And every once in a while, they'd call out a number and somebody would kind of cheer. And then, you know, it's indelicate, but somebody would go, oh, shit. Yeah, and look, this guy's drafted. Yeah. And the next day on campus, walking around, and you'd run into one of your friends. And at first we'd all say, well, what was your number last night? And we'd exchange numbers. And by early afternoon, I would walk up to a friend that I hadn't seen during the morning, and I would say 281, and he would say 15. You didn't even ask each other, how you doing? You didn't say hello. I just walked up to every male student that I saw, and I said 281, and I would hear what their number was. And it was, we lived with that. We went through that, where everything that we did, I was really not trying to avoid the draft. I wanted to go to college. I wanted to be an artist. I was taking classes based on what was going to benefit me as an artist. And I was taking some extra stuff. So I was sort of dragging it out a little bit. And before the draft lottery, several of my friends and I were threatened with academic probation for not pursuing our majors. Today, if you want to go to school and drag it out for 20 years, nobody says a word about it. You're paying the university and they're happy to take your money. And that, the military was putting pressure on universities. And so we had all been in school for about 5 years already and threatened with academic probation for not pursuing the major. And there was a day when I got a notice for a pre-induction physical. I said, I've got a 2S deferment. And I said, you've been in school for 5 years. So a bunch of us rode up on a bus together to Cleveland and went through a pre-induction physical, walking around in our underwear for 2 hours and being inspected. And this happened right after one of my best friends was drafted. And he contacted the draft board and said, well, I've got a 2S deferment. And the draft people at the draft board said, you graduate in June, and in June you belong to us. And so he spent his last 2 or 3 quarters as a student knowing that he was already drafted. And it was only a few weeks after that I got the notice for the pre-induction physical. And so, draft cards weren't supposed to be identification. And that's what we used all the time. If you went down to the bars, as long as the draft card proved you were 18, just pull out your draft card. My old draft card, I still have it around someplace. It looks like it's been folded up and thrown away a dozen times, but it was just pulling it in and out of my wallet all the time, anytime I wanted to go into a bar. Not that I went in the bars that much.
So one of the unique perspectives you had is that you were commuting from Akron to Kent, and you were working for the Beacon Journal.
Yeah.
And working for the Daily Kent Stater. We happened to be in the space that was once the offices of the Daily Kent Stater.
Yes.
So I want to talk about that within the context of May 4 and the illustrations and photographs that you took on May 4. So what I have up here are the Akron Beacon Journal pages that ran as a Beacon Journal artist saw it. And if you could talk about the drawings within the context of the photographs that you took and how they relate to each other and what story they tell.
Yeah. Well, as a graphic design major, one of my required classes was a photography class in the journalism department. And I was taking that class spring quarter of 1970. And you know, all the stuff is happening, and on Sunday, I was a commuter, so I didn't see everything that was going on. I wasn't around during the burning of the ROTC building. I was on campus the next day taking photographs. And then Monday, May 4th, I went in for classes. I took a midterm class in Nixon Hall, which I always thought was kind of strange to be in Nixon Hall on May 4th. And I had my camera, and I just kept thinking, I'm taking pictures of Jeeps and a couple of guys standing around the remains of the ROTC building, and thinking I just might have some good stuff for photography class here. And I was in a small office as chairman of Chestnut League, which was just off of the Commons, when I heard the bell ringing and I saw the guard marching down into the Commons, and grabbed my camera thinking, oh, I'll have some really cool shots here. I wasn't expecting anything. And just started taking photos. And you know, next thing I know, they're shooting tear gas. The next thing I know, they're marching over the hill. And then I see them, you know, kneeling and aiming rifles, and they start to march back. I'm thinking everything's over. And I walked inside the building. My girlfriend was a journalism student, and I knew she was working in the Stater office just the other side of that wall. And so I thought, well, it's all over. I'll go down and, you know, the windows at the Stater office, go out into the Commons, and just see what she saw. And I learned later that just as the doors of the building closed behind me, the guard turned and fired right through the area I'd just been standing in. So I missed possibly being shot by about 30 seconds. And the aftermath of that was just kind of wild. You know, being inside and not knowing what happened with the shootings. We didn't go back out for a while because I didn't know if they were still shooting. I had a fear of the guard because on Sunday afternoon, I went through a wrong door and ended up on a spate outside the administration building. What Cartwright Hall now? Thing is that it? And there used to be connectors between the two side buildings, and I was cutting through the front campus to see what was going on. And I walked through the door and looking, and I see faces of students and the backs of National Guardsmen. What's going on? And just then one of my friends, of course, says, "Hey, Ayers, what the hell are you doing over there?" And suddenly they spun around, and I had maybe a dozen M1s pointed at me. I was the only one there. And it's Sunday, you know, it's just like this game. None of this seems real. I had a camo jacket on, hands on top of my head, and I just kept walking, you know. They grabbed me, and they had cordoned off the building, but they never locked the doors. So I walked through. And so I'm aware that somebody has been shot sitting there in the Stater office. And the only thing I can see is less than 24 hours before, a dozen M1s pointed at me. So I got kind of paranoid. But I went back out. I saw way too much. And finally, they closed the campus. And I knew I had a camera full of film, you know. And it's younger people don't understand any of this. I mean, I didn't have a cell phone. I didn't have a digital camera. I had my last roll of black and white film. I had 36 exposures. So there was a lot I didn't take pictures of because I knew that I was running out of film. And they've closed the campus. And my first thought was, I'm taking this back to the Beacon. I'm a part-timer there, and so I drove off campus. First thing I had to do was drive through a roadblock of National Guardsmen, but there were the race riots, they called them, in Akron in 1968, and because we had to go into the paper during the time of the curfews, I still had a Press Akron Beacon Journal on the visor of my Volkswagen. So I put it down and started to leave campus and had to stop for this row of guardsmen with what everybody knew then were, I figured they had bullets, but we knew it then, and fixed bayonets and gas masks, and they just kept looking at me and asked me about the thing. I said, yeah, I work at the Beacon and I'm heading back there now. They sort of reluctantly let me through. And then about 100 yards beyond that, I had to go through another roadblock of state highway patrolmen. And finally got off campus, and I'm driving back to the Beacon. And I walk in, I've got a Kent State t-shirt. I walk into the newsroom, and it's like everything went silent. And all these heads just turned and looked, because they didn't know, they knew I was a Kent State student, but they didn't know what I had done or seen. And finally we started talking, and I said, look, I've got a roll of film here, and if you want it, you can use anything on it. And so the photographers took the film, and I started being interviewed. Well, what did you see? What did you do? Where were you? And it's something that has, I think, benefited me. It's one of the reasons that I remember so much. Today, if you go through this, it took me a while to realize that I was a survivor of a mass shooting at a school. You know, we read about them every day now. And that's what I lived through. And today, you know, they send it, the shots, you know, they're still echoing in the halls, and they send in healthcare, mental health professionals to comfort and to counsel people that have been through this. And at Kent, it was like, okay, we're closing the campus. You're on your own. You know, and I have so many people that I've talked to that never talked about it to anybody for years. Never told people they were there. Held everything inside. There were so many of the people that I know of that, you know, they went back and talked to their folks, and their folks said, you know, they should have shot everybody. And so a lot of people didn't talk about it. And I think very few people saw anybody that could actually counsel them. And there I was, maybe 2 hours after the shootings, and I've got a full-scale interview going with reporters. And it wasn't very long after that one ended that somebody else came up and said, well, we want to talk to you some more. And so I went through a second interview. And, you know, newspaper reporters are pretty good interviewers. You know, they can pull an awful lot of stuff out of you. And so I had to remember very quickly all the things that I'd just seen. And I was sitting in the art department, and I was talking to a couple people because they were starting to put together a map of what happened on campus, and I was advising, you know, where this happened and where that happened and what I saw. And somebody, I don't even remember who it was, if it was a photographer or an editor, said, well, thanks a lot. There's nothing here we could use, but you've done eyewitness drawings before. I used to do some courtroom drawings for the paper. And they said, could you do some eyewitness drawings from what you remember? I'm like, sure I can. And so they asked for some roughs. I worked up several things like this. I tried to just mentally do a little timeline of what I saw. and worked up a quick drawing of each event. And these were all completed probably by about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The shootings were at 12:30. So I believe it was probably the first artwork done about the shootings. And somebody else may have done stuff, but and the thing that always amazed me later was that I had never seen a single photograph. I'd never seen Philo's photo of the girl over Jeff Miller's body. I'd never seen my own photos. I knew what I took, but in those days, you snapped your roll of film, you sent it off to the drugstore, and a few days later it came back. It wasn't like digital where you snap it and, oh, that's okay. So that's where that was. So I had never seen a single photograph. And well, they sort of matched an awful lot of what I actually saw. And the one that still spooks me is when I did when I came back out after the shootings, I stayed up on the veranda around the building. I never went down because it had been a couple minutes because we were basically afraid to go outside, thinking we didn't know where they were shooting, if they were still shooting. And first thing I saw was Jeff Miller's body in the street. And I took a picture of it, from the distance. I mean, it's real tiny, but it burned this image into my head. And I did the drawing of it. Yeah. I mean, that's my photo. The guy is kneeling in the same place. The other guy is his back is there. It's feet are crossed. It's you still see it like it's right here in front of me. And I'd never seen this photo. I didn't see this photo for another week. And yeah, and I had no access to a dark room, and I wasn't about to take that roll of film to the drugstore. So I talked to Paul Topol, one of our photographers, who had been here that day, another student also working at the Beacon. And a day or so later, I asked him if he'd make some prints for me, and he said he would. So it was a week or so before I ever saw this photo. And while he had the photo or my negatives back in the art department, the FBI came in and subpoenaed all the Beacon's photos and negatives. And I talked to several of my friends who the FBI got their stuff and they never got anything back. But I think it was because my work was in with the Beacon photos that they returned everything. And then one of my photos ended up being printed in the President's Commission on Campus Unrest. It just has an Akron Beacon Journal credit, but I know it's mine. So yeah, I mean it was really wild, and I was commuting. I lived at home during school because my folks had no money to send me to school, so the only help I got was I could live at home. And so I'm home that night in Goodyear Heights in Akron and watching the 11 o'clock news. And that's the first time I heard the shots. It was on TV. And then and while I was there that evening, they said, hey, school's closed for a while. You can be full-time until you go back to school, thinking it was going to be a week or so. And I didn't go back to school until September. But yeah, it was a wild ride. It's, I tell people that the young guy who walked onto campus that day on Monday, May 1st, never left that campus. It was a completely different person who walked away. And I've been different ever since. And it's, I have friends who say, well, why do you dwell on this? This is a part of me, I remember things about that, partly I think because of being interviewed right an hour or so after the shootings. I remember details almost minute by minute through several days. And I don't remember my wedding day with any detail like that. I don't remember the birth of my kids with any kind of detail like that. I can tell you minute by minute almost where I was all day long on May 4th. Through May 5th and 6th, I can tell you where I was on the 30th, sitting in the University Auditorium when Nixon announced the invasion of Cambodia. We're sitting there waiting for a film festival to start, and somebody walked in with a portable black and white TV, set it up on the stage, plugged it in, turned it on, and there was Nixon announcing the invasion of Cambodia. And you can imagine how that really, made that film festival a lot of fun. We all just, we sat there thinking about it. Everybody kind of left early because you just couldn't focus on the movies. But I mean, I remember minute by minute going through that evening, going through parts of the next day, being on campus on Sunday, every place I was on Monday, everything I saw, almost everybody that I talked to. My wife will say something about our wedding, and I go, "Oh, was I there? I don't remember that."
Look, I want to thank you for sharing your story of May 4 because I know it can be tough, and it's tough we've talked about processing this every time around now in the spring this year and the feelings that it brings up. I wanted to wrap things up talking about we've mentioned that students who were here on May 4 didn't have the kinds of therapy and healthcare that maybe students who are involved in school shootings today have. But I wanted to talk about art as therapy because throughout your career, as you created cartoons at the Akron Beacon Journal, and when you did the 30th anniversary of Crankshaft, you really return to May 4 a lot. So it's, sometimes talking about current issues like the MAC Annex, and we've talked about this one on the screen. We don't have to share explicitly about it tonight, but you return to this and you are processing these ideas around May 4 through art. So I wanted to talk about how has that been? How have cartoons helped you to process and think about those events throughout your life and career?
Yeah, I mean, I know it's helped, but I am such a visual person that I process everything that way. I've realized at times when I'm learning things that have nothing to do with images that I turn them into images. I think in images. You say I'm a good storyteller, but to me, I'm struggling because words don't say what I feel, but the images do. And the political cartoons were always this kind of a blend of both. Oh God. Yeah, I don't remember most of these.
Governor Rhodes was a favorite.
Oh,
We talked
yeah.
about this one on the far left, but returning to Governor Rhodes throughout his.
Yeah,
Career.
this was during the one of the energy crises. And Rhodes had said something about I guess this isn't the one I was thinking of, but he had made a statement of people were struggling to get natural gas for their home heating and things like that. And he had made this statement about, well, why don't we just go back to coal? And I remember doing a drawing of Rhodes shoveling coal onto the side of a gas furnace. So it wasn't even an opening, you know, it's just hitting off the sides. And one of our Washington Bureau reporters came to me and he says, you know, you struck a nerve there. He said, we sit in these press conferences and they give us the printouts of what's going to be discussed. And the person who was handing out the press reports had been coached. And when that person came to the Beacon reporter, rather than handing him the report, they threw it at him. And they were asked about it, and the governor did not like that. Good. I don't like the governor. So, yeah, I mean, I remember doing one for the Stater that I'm sure you don't have. But Rhodes was trying to do all these cutbacks to funding higher education. And, you know, there's Rhodes Road on campus. And I had like a school bus, I think it was some sort of a vehicle going down the road, and it was nothing but ruts in the road, and it was Rhodes Road to higher education.
That's,
Is it
I
in?
think it's
It's
way
in that
back.
road.
Yeah,
It's like before that,
earlier.
it's way back.
Yeah. I think we've got it. Let's see.
Or way back.
There
Right
it
there.
is.
There it is.
Here,
Oh,
yeah.
I used my Volkswagen.
So you did roast Rhodes.
I guess I was doing
Quite a
political
bit.
cartoons.
Yeah, you
But I never thought of it that way.
But it's truly, there's a
They
difference.
were all Kent State related.
Uh-huh.
Doing that one with the Portage County Grand Jury, it wasn't a local issue, it was a national issue for the
There's
first time.
anger in this one.
There sure
And the
is.
line work and the text
Yeah,
that is very different.
it's not a good cartoon. I mean, it's not what I would ever want to
Mhm.
do these days. This is a 22-year-old who's pissed off. And that's what came out. But I did like, I know the caption under the New York Times said something about a cartoon that reflects the sentiment on campus. And I thought it did.
So the last section of our exhibition is your return to the topic of May 4 through the 2000 crankshaft.
Yeah.
Works. And what I really liked about this as we were talking, because I did not realize it until I first met you and we were discussing your experience, is how much the experience of the character of the mother in
Yeah.
the crankshaft comic strip mirrors your own experience.
Yeah.
I was reading it and was like, this is Chuck.
Yeah, I guess I was sort of a trans character.
Mhm.
I mean, he took my experiences and turned it into Pam's experience.
Mhm.
Because we'd established in the strip years before. It was my fault because one of the strips that Tom wrote, there was no reason to do it, but Pam was doing something and I put her in a Kent State t-shirt. And I remember Tom calling me when he saw it, and he said, I never realized that Pam went to school with us. And it became a thing. And in 2000, his son was I think a senior in high school and was looking at college campuses, and Tom brought him up here to Kent. And Tom was realizing that we were coming up on it would have been the year before, on the 30th anniversary. And he knew that, sorry, I think I'm bringing here, I hope this doesn't.
We're ready.
Um, he knew that I was there. He had graduated in '69, so he wasn't around at the time. And so he started talking to me about it, and I was just telling him my stories, and he sort of took that and ran with it. But in order to make it not my story, he took a lot of the things that I experienced, but put it in Pam's character. And so her then boyfriend, is later married to her and in the strip. But the two of them are running around doing things, and it's, he took liberties too. So there's an awful lot in there that he sort of made up,
Mhm.
just to keep the story going.
I think she has a bayonet scar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's my camera. I drew my old camera that I used that day. Yeah, I was very pleased to do that because I knew that there would be an audience there. I knew it was a big anniversary. I was pleased with how he wrote it. And it got a lot of recognition, and I think it talked about healing. I think there was a big healing process that went on at that time, because Tom talked about donating the originals to the special collection. And it was at that point, 30 years after the shootings, that I finally said, it's time to take my photos and my negatives and donate them. It took me 30 years to do that. I mean, I had them just in my possession, and almost nobody saw them till then. And it's a bunch of new photos, and so I think everybody had seen every photo that they had for the first 30 years. And then there's this new batch that came in. So I started seeing my pictures everywhere. But I think that was a big healing thing, that anniversary, just the whole thing about that anniversary. It was the biggest gathering after the first couple of years that I remember. I remember walking around and running into people that I knew had been at Kent, but never realized that they were there on May 4th. And realizing that we were probably standing 5 feet from each other during much of it. And I don't remember seeing that many grown men walking around crying for a day. I did, it just that something about 30 years that seemed to be something. I remember, just as an aside, my dad worked on B-29s during the war, and a B-29 came into the Akron Municipal Airport and was on display. And I took my dad to see it, and I sort of am aware that suddenly there's all these men, all my dad's age, and they're all kind of walking around, and they're kind of looking at each other like, and pretty soon they start talking. Every one of them had worked on B-29s, and it was 30 years after the end of World War II. And Dad never talked about it. And he came out, I heard stories that day that I'd never heard before. I never heard them again after that. I was hearing these other stories, all these guys, none of them knew each other. but many of them were on the same island together, on the same field together. And I thought, wow, this was really cool. And it wasn't until 30 years after May 4th that I started realizing that this is 30 years again. And it's the same kind of experience that I watched my dad go through 30 years after the war ended.
Chuck, I want to thank you for sharing your visual stories and this time with us this evening. I want to mention too that at your tables there are papers so you can create your own comic tonight and add it to our wall, hopefully. And since we have multiple artists in our exhibition here with us tonight, maybe they want to do that too. So thank you to Chuck. Chuck is going to be around to answer questions. I also want to mention that Darth Bacter is here in the back of the room as well.
And he didn't throw anything at me.
No, he didn't give us a hard time up here or anything. I'm really proud of him. So he is also here and he might be willing to answer your questions as well. So thank you so much for coming. There's plenty of food. And yeah, I hope you stick around.
I almost made it through.
Yeah, we did it.
How you doing?